Prohibition and the Temperance Movement by Aidan Tapia. Thesis: the temperance movement was a highly debated topic that pushed Congress to pass an amendment that was unconstitutional. What was the temperance movement? The temperance movement, which was started by the women of the church, was a highly debated issue. Strangely, in the end, almost all Americans pushed to pass the movement. Instead of making it a law, Congress actually made it a constitutional amendment, which upset many Americans. Almost as soon as the amendment was passed, people deemed it unfair and unconstitutional. This was in part because the amendment did not just ban hard whiskey, it also banned any product with more than just 0.05% alcohol. The origins of Prohibition. By the turn of the decade, temperance societies were common in most communities across the U.S. Women played a strong role in the temperance movement, as the effects of alcohol were seen as a destructive force in families and in marriages. In 1906, a new wave of attacks began on the sale of liquor, led by the Anti-Saloon League and driven by a reaction to urban growth, as well as the rise of evangelical Protestantism and its view of saloon culture as corrupt and ungodly. In addition, many factory owners supported Prohibition in their desire to prevent accidents and increase the efficiency of their workers. The passing of the 18th Amendment. Congress submitted the 18th Amendment, which banned the manufacture, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverages for state ratification. Though Congress had made a 7-year time limit for the process, the amendment received the support of a necessary 3/4 of the United States in just 11 months. In October 1919, Congress put forth the National Prohibition Act, which provided guidelines for the federal enforcement of prohibition. Led by Representative Andrew Volstead of Minnesota, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, the legislation was more commonly known as the Volstead Act. Important people during the temperance movement. Wayne Wheeler was an influential part of Prohibition and the events leading up to it. He was basically an evil genius, and his tactics were brilliant. He was able to make people that hated each other agree on one thing: alcohol was bad. How did he do it? Well, first he told factory workers that alcohol was a capitalist ploy to keep them lower than the upper-class citizens. He also told factory owners that alcohol was making their workers lazy. Wheeler told the black community that alcohol was hindering its progress, while racists were told alcohol turned black men into brutes. Totally opposing groups found themselves agreeing for one thing: no more alcohol. Another important person in the debate over alcohol was Carrie Nation. She was a single mother who saw people selling alcohol and the effects it had on men. She then decided to take matters into her own hands. She went into bars and saloons and smashed up the place with an axe and a purse full of rocks. Nation attempted to encourage other women to take on this destructive strategy, but none caught on to her strange attempts at diplomacy. The secret stills and the speakeasies. Because of the lack of alcohol, people started illegally manufacturing alcohol in secret stills that they hid everywhere from cars to forests, parking lots to hidden caves. During Prohibition, people came up with all kinds of sneaky ways to hide the illegal liquor. There were these places called speakeasies, where people would manufacture, sell, and consume alcohol. One would have a special ID to get in. They were hidden in secret places so that the police wouldn't find them. Enforcement of the amendment. Both the federal and the local government struggled to enforce Prohibition over the course of the 1920s. Enforcement was initially assigned to the IRS and was later transferred to the Justice Department and the Bureau of Prohibition, or the Prohibition Bureau. In general, Prohibition was enforced much more strongly in areas where the population was a little bit more accepting of the legislation, mainly rural areas and small towns, and much more loosely in urban areas. Despite early signs of success, including a decline in arrests of the inebriated and a reported 30% drop in alcohol consumption, those who wanted to keep drinking found ever more inventive ways to do it. In addition, the Prohibition era encouraged the rise of criminal activity associated with bootlegging. Prohibition's end. The high price of bootleg liquor meant that the nation's working class and poor were far more restricted during Prohibition than middle or upper class Americans. Even as costs for law enforcement, jails, and prisons spiraled upwards, support for Prohibition was actually decreasing by the end of the 1920s. Also, fundamentalists and nativist forces had gained more control over the temperance movement, alienating its more moderate members. Though a few states continued to prohibit alcohol after Prohibition's end, all had abandoned the ban by 1966.